guest and personal Charles Jr. We thank you so much for joining us, whether on air or online. This evening, a very special presentation, as for the next few minutes, we'll be discussing the circumstances surrounding domestic workers in Antigua, Barbuda, provisions made for their organization, their protection, and so we have a very august panel assembled in studios this evening, and together we will unpack and clarify some of those issues. Joining me to my far right is Ms. Lisa Ann Yearwood. She's Industrial Relations Officer at the Antigua Trades and Labor Union. Good evening, Ms. Yearwood, and welcome. Welcome. We also have Mr. Dequan Samuel, a legal consultant attached to the Ministry of Public Safety and Labor, and of course is a member of the C189, C190 task force. Mr. Samuel, good evening.
Good evening, thanks for having me.
And we also have to my immediate right is Andy Stephen. She is, of course, of the People's Union now and a former coordinator of the Domestic Workers Section or Unit at the Antigua Trades and Labor Union. As we said, a very informed panel. Today is International Domestic Workers Day, and we want to be able to recognize those who work in this somewhat unheralded segment of the workforce and see if we can seek to clarify some of the issues that surround them and how we can best deal with the issues that they currently face, whether it's in employment or any other issue across Antigua, Barbuda. So let's start by talking about the importance of the day. International Domestic Workers Day, of course, sheds light on the need for these workers to be in the spotlight. Ms. Haywood, I'll start with you and then come back to Ms. Stephen.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Charles. The International Domestic Workers Day, which is tomorrow, is geared towards advocacy and bringing awareness to domestic workers across the world. It is important that we have a change in our outlook on who domestic workers are and their need for social protection and the standards that most workers enjoy every day.
Stephen, you want to add anything to that?
I just think that it is very unique to understand why the ILO would have created a section or a convention specific for them, understanding that those workers were not protected and understanding that they needed to put a convention in place, which is a mechanism to look at the fact that some of these workers needed protection. So if you, in some instances, persons thought that it was a bad thing, that you created a whole convention, but it's actually a good thing because now you're able to measure their progress in terms of how they're treated, what can be done in terms of their benefits, and what plans can be put in place from a national perspective to protect them.
And when we talk about them, perhaps you should really identify who we're talking about here, domestic workers. Someone asked Offset earlier, you know, who are we talking about? Who are we referring to when we say domestic workers?
Domestic workers would be anyone that works out of the home. So that would be domestic workers would be classified as a terminology we normally use, which would be maids, would be elderly care assistants, person that works with our older persons and help support them, take care of them during the day while their family members are out of the home. That would be gardeners. So in general, anyone that works in the home environment.
So the maid, the nanny, the pool boy, the gardener,
yes.
Those are the usual terms that we use. They're all
The
included.
dog watchers.
All workers, for that matter.
Yes.
Okay, all right, good. Now, as far as I'm hearing, there is an association of domestic workers. Who cares to talk about them and perhaps some of the work that they do?
Okay, so the Domestic Workers Association was born out of the Domestic Workers section of the ATNLU. So over there, I think it was about 2013, the General Secretary felt that there was a need for us to have a section dedicated towards domestic workers after the convention was put into place. So he advocated, he did marches, he recruited members, domestic workers across Antigua, and he formed this domestic workers section. As they matured, they felt they had a need for self-governance, so they moved on and they formed a domestic workers section. Association.
All right, and they have a president and a vice president, and a very
Structure.
Yes, a very organized structure. Let's talk about the issues, though, that they face from where you sit, from what you've been hearing from the association, from what you're hearing on the ground. What are some of the issues that these workers face, perhaps that are captured by some of the conventions that we will discuss further as the evening progresses?
Okay, well, some things that these domestic workers face would be they lack social protection, so they don't have the regular rights. They would not have medical benefits. Well, they would have medical benefits, but Social Security. So after years of working in someone's home, they are left without a pension. There's also, historically, there's some domestic workers who live in-house, so there's issues of abuse. It could be sexual, verbal. So those are things that we need to look at. They also will not have rights to vacation in some instance and sick days. So rights that regular workers would have access to, they will not have access to those rights.
Okay, I've just raised my eyebrows, both of them at the same time, when you said they don't have access to sick leave and etc. How is it that a worker employed in this country does not have access to those rights?
Because they would be classified as an invisible worker. So the standard and the belief of the employer is that they don't have the rights like a regular worker. I can even build on that, even with termination. They could be terminated instantly, and instead of using the normal protection other workers have, where there would be a procedure put in place to protect them. So again, it's the mindset of the society in general that if you work in the home, you're not really a worker. So you would not be entitled to those rights that a regular worker would have.
Okay, so both of you work from the union perspective. So maybe you can tell us if this is something that you hear often enough, because I find it very hard to believe that somebody can be employed and be terminated right away without due process, or to not have access to sick days, or not have Social Security paid on their behalf, etc.
I can go a little bit further with it in terms of trafficking. And I think even when we started the task force, we had human trafficking a part of the task force as well too, because working in that whole environment, you hear a lot of stories. And to be honest with you, as a trade unionist, you have this fight in you that you want to get up and just go and fight the employer because you just don't understand, because there are laws in place. And the notion is that, as Lisa would have said, because they work in the home, like they're not a worker. But if you look at the definition of what the ILO says a worker is and what our labor code says a worker is, then they're not exempt from that. It's just that persons feel that they're not protected, or the employees feel that they're not protected enough by our laws. So there's this certain level of don't care-ish attitude, as I would say, that how they're treated with. But human trafficking is actually a thing. It's not a big thing, but we've had cases where passports have been withheld. Persons would have been brought in here for specifically to do one job, let's say to clean your home or to be a babysitter, and they end up on Porkside Street. And their passports are taken away from them. They're threatened if they say anything. You know, we've not had major cases, but we've had one or two that came through the system that we actually had to get the police involved and that sort of stuff. But I'm just saying it's wider than just sick days and I'm not paying benefits and that sort of stuff. They are abusing the home, and as Lisa would have said, living maids or nannies, they can't leave. If they get a day off, they have to stay on property for their day off, and that's not right. Your day off is your day off. Whatever you decide to do with it, it's up to you. But we do have those sort of things happening here. Unfortunately, most of them are not reported. So we don't get to deal with them as quickly as we would want to. And that's one of the things why the convention is very important, because it creates that advocacy and that voice for them, and for them to feel protected so they can do the reporting. But yet still, we have a lot of work to do.
So my question then is, are we seeing these things happen because of the disparity in perhaps the nationality of the workers who are sometimes taking up these jobs? Because from what you mentioned, it seems that a lot of the issues persist with non-nationals who perhaps are coming to the country to get work, as opposed to Antiguans and Barbadians, or born Antiguans and Barbadians who take up those positions. Is that the case?
Most of the domestic workers are migrants. They're not from here. And you find that because they don't have anybody here to assist them, or to look after them, you find that there's the thing is that I'm here to make a living, so I will just take anything. Not knowing that there is an umbrella for protection for you, then there is a system where persons don't get to come to the unions or know that they can go to the police or they can go to different places to get help. So we have to work on education as well too, because one of the other issues too is the language barrier. Now hearing that Spanish is going to be one of our second languages. So that is going to definitely help in communicating, because some of them are Hispanic as well too.
Muy bien. Mr. Samuel, let's bring you in here and talk about the role of the Ministry of Labour. We've heard Ms. Stephen talk about the ILO, the International Labour Organization. Talk to us about the role of, or your role, the role of the organization you are attached to when it comes to the domestic workers.
Yeah, so the Labour Code empowers the Labour Department to receive and seek to resolve complaints brought to it by all workers, including domestic workers. So there's a complaints mechanism available that domestic workers can avail themselves of if they believe that their rights have been violated or their employers are mistreating them in some way.
You said the complaints process, Ms. Stephen and Ms. Stephen, I want to come back in here because to someone that you just described who is not from here, who doesn't have family here, there must be some trepidation as to what will happen to me if I make a report. What's your advice to that individual?
Lisa, you want to go? And then
Well, I will start first. I think that's why you have the association. So we're empowering, the association is empowered to help and advocate for those persons, so they could find a fellow domestic worker who would be a part of the association. They could also join the association, and we will assist them with getting the necessary help that they need. So that is part of the move forward with the association, and also with the aid of the union. We're helping them build up their membership, and also help them with the advocacy in that specific need. Because part of the challenges they have reported back to us is that persons have a lot of fear. So even though they're willing, they're afraid their employer is going to find out. They're afraid that something will happen to them. So I think the most important thing is they could find a member of the a fellow domestic worker. They could find the association, which will definitely point them in the right direction, or there's a labor office, and of course the unions that are here to help them and solve their problem.
Stephen, want to jump in here as well?
I just wanted to add that while we have the process, we also need the legislation to back it. Now, one of the easiest things that happen is that our labor code, the way in which it is structured, it made it very easy for us to ratify the convention, because most of the articles in the convention aligned with our labor code.
Okay.
So when we looked at it, we said, okay, there was nothing much that we needed to do in terms of making any amendments to anything. What we needed to do is implementation and enforcement. And I think generally across the board, that's one of the things that we suffer with, enforcement. We would quickly sign to something, we would quickly put it on the books, but to have it enforced. Even with the articles in the convention, C189, it makes provisions for penalties. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is, do we create a schedule for penalties, or do we create a whole bill or a legislation that covers across the board? Now, persons are going to ask, why just domestic workers? If you look at termination and you look at inconvenience for jobs in terms of how persons are treated, domestic workers tend to be at the highest level. As Lisa would have explained before, that they don't get the benefits that a general worker would get. And I think that one of the things that we need to look at is, do we make that change in our labor code to support it, or do we create something else that helps and assists the convention that is already in place? Because you can't have employers thinking, okay, I can do as I feel like and there's nothing for it. We go through a system. You go to the union, you go to the association, you go to the labor department, you can get all the way up to industrial court. and you find that the process is very long. And some persons will tell you, well, it doesn't make any sense because it's so drawn out. So how do we deal with those situations? Do we deal with them within a 48 period? Do we deal with them with a particular haste that we can get it, started out? You have the instances where I explained, passports are withheld. How do we treat with that if we, don't put certain things in black and white to protect against that?
Perhaps we should then, Mr. Samuel, explain what Convention 189 and 190 are, so that our viewers, our audience, gets a better understanding as to what we're talking about in these conventions.
Okay. C189 is the Domestic Workers Convention, and the goal of it is to ensure that domestic workers can have access to the same suite of rights that workers enjoy generally. And having ratified that convention, our government now has the obligation to ensure that they give life to the provisions of the convention through legislation or through policy. C190 is the Violence and Harassment Convention. The goal of that one is to prevent instances of violence and harassment in the workplace. It also seeks to regulate how we respond when those instances do occur. It speaks to employers also implementing violence and harassment policies to govern the workplace, training so that employees are aware of what behaviors might be problematic. Also, and importantly, implementing a dispute resolution mechanism within the workplace, so that if somebody feels that they've been the victim of violence and harassment, that they can seek redress from within the workplace.
I want to go back to that, because as you mentioned both conventions, I just thought it would be very difficult for not only a national, but for a woman, and I suspect that most domestic workers are women as well, and that it makes it particularly interesting, for want of a better term, because the workplace is the home. And so there's no escape, so to speak, is that you are being mistreated at home and at work, so to speak, at the very same time.
When the Domestic Workers Convention came about, one of the issues that we had is that the definition of a workplace. Employers were saying, it's my home, that is not a place of work. However, we quickly fixed that and gave the Labour Commissioner the right to enter your home, which is considered a place of work. Because before, when complaints were being made, there was nobody who could have gone into that space to say, yes, I see what's happening here. The law now gives the Labour Commissioner the sole right to go into that space and say, well, this is not right, this should not be happening, this space is not adequate, this is not by law. So we actually fixed that after the convention. So that was one of the steps that we took to address some of the issues, because the conversation at that point in time is, what do you determine as a workplace? And the law was very clear, the ILO convention and the definition was very clear. So the Labour Commissioner's law was amended to facilitate her or him, whoever was a commissioner, to go into the home now as a place of work. So we fixed that issue. The other issue is that you find that there's this level of fear and there's this level of not wanting to lose my job. I have to provide for my family. I have kids back home. I'm the only breadwinner and I came here for a better life. We've been trying to break that fear. But I think what's happening is that not having the information is one thing, and not seeing a lot of things in action kind of puts persons in that bubble where they don't want to see what's happening. And I think going forward, that's something that we really need to focus on, breaking the silence for persons, that they can report what is happening. We can do it silently. You don't have to be, say, well, we will go into, but we can deal with the situation very silently. We can actually do like what they did in 1974. We can just have a mass investigation into persons who have domestic workers. I never know. But just to get to the root of it, you have to be very strategic with a lot of these policies and all of these tactics that persons are using. Because if you do look at a letter that is given to a domestic worker versus a letter that is given to you or myself. The language is very different and the benefits are very different. Why?
So perhaps homeowners need to be trained as employers, if that's what you're talking about, because usually if you're an employer or a manager in a workplace, you get certain training as to how you write a disciplinary letter and the procedure to follow. But if you're a homeowner who has employed a domestic worker, perhaps you don't have that training. Perhaps it's something that can be looked into.
Anybody who employs anyone has the right, or who is an employer has the right to go to, they have a union for themselves, which is Employees Federation. There's information out there that they can get as well too. So I'm just saying that there's absolutely nothing that prevents anybody from treating somebody the right way. Even outside of the law, even outside of all the policies that we have, it's just the mere fact that we're all humans. And I think even in our general workspace, some persons forget that. You put down a rule, you put down a law, and you stand by it, but at the end of the day, where's the empathy? Where's the sympathy? Where's the understanding? You're dealing with somebody who has emotions, somebody who's going to react to anything that you say. So how is it that we're just treating people as disposable resources?
Unfortunate indeed. That message, I hope it rings loud and clear. We've already come to half an hour of this program, believe it or not. It's time for our first and only break here on ABS TV Presents. We're having a very special conversation about domestic workers in this country, recognition of tomorrow's commemoration of International Domestic Workers Day. We're speaking to representatives of the union and the Ministry of Labour. We'll take a break and be back after this. If you plan to stay at home during a hurricane, there are things you can do to protect yourself. Monitor local radio and/or television stations for weather reports. Stay indoors until the impact is over. Stay away from glass windows and exterior doors. Evacuate to a neighbor's home or shelter if your home is damaged or if emergency personnel instruct you to do so. This message is brought to you by the Antigua Barbuda Broadcasting Services. For more information on hurricane preparedness, contact the National Office of Disaster Services at 462-4206.
ACB, drive to 70. With ACB, we know BYD SUV.
It's been 70 years, let's celebrate.
Our legacy's strong, our future's great, yeah, yeah.
Every loan, every tap that you do brings that BYD SUV closer to you.
Drive to 70, then we celebrate. ACB strong, the future's great. Drive to 70, keep the party alive. Come with our SUV and take the champion drive.
Every loan you take, every tap you make.
Yes, each one gives you more chances to win.
The prize? A brand new BYD SUV.
70 years strong, take a victory ride. Drive to 70, keep the party alive. Come with our SUV and take the champion drive.
Terms and conditions apply.
Antigua and Barbuda will be at the center of global business this November. For the first time in its history, the country will host the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM. A key part of those discussions will be the Commonwealth Business Forum. It will be hosted by the Commonwealth Secretariat in partnership with the government of Antigua and Barbuda and the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, CIWE.
The road to CHOGM will therefore focus on new initiatives for high-impact investments, building deeper trade and investment partnerships.
A lot of business people will come to our country and they will share technological developments, they will share investment opportunities, and we certainly want to make sure that our local business people are at the table.
Decision makers and thought leaders in business will converge on Antigua for this blockbuster event. Local businesses will get their chance to network and explore cutting-edge partnerships to take their enterprises to the world. The sub-region will also be engaged as the forum will feature the Investment Summit with a participation from the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Find out how you and your business can be a part of the Commonwealth Business Forum from November 2 to 4, 2026. contact the planning office today at 464-5113. The Commonwealth Business Forum will be game-changing. Be a part of it.
Welcome back to ABS Television, or ABS TV Presents. We're talking about International Domestic Workers Day. We've already talked about C189. We're talking about domestic workers, and we've already delved somewhat into C190. We're talking about workplace violence and harassment. Now we delve even more into that discussion right now because it moves beyond domestic workers to all workers, and of course your right to operate within an environment that's free from workplace violence and harassment. Now, Mr. Samuel, we've already talked a little about C190. Can we talk about the importance of that convention and, of course, the ratification in Antigua Barbuda? We'll be having a series of public consultations, I know now, about workplace violence and harassment. We'll talk to us about that.
Okay, so I'll say, I think in our society there are certain behaviors that have flown under the radar for a long time. Partly due to the fact that I don't think violence and harassment in the workplace is at the forefront of our conversations as much as it should be. So take for instance, certain scandalous remarks that a man may make towards his female co-worker.
And vice versa.
Point taken.
Okay.
Yes, those behaviors have been, they largely remain unchecked. Persons don't feel empowered to speak up. They don't want to be seen as a spoil sport. They don't want to be seen as disagreeable. So it's festive for a while, and I think this is why the training is important as well, because workers within the organization can sort of come to some kind of common understanding of what is acceptable and what crosses the line.
From the union's perspective, have we seen many incidents or many reports of workplace violence and harassment over the years?
Very much so, yes. Very much so. That has been growing. Persons would come in and report their situations, and we try our best to assist them. And it's the fear of losing their job. So you ask them, you help them as best as you can, but then you have to factor in the fact that some persons might, they have that fear, but we walk them through the process and let them know that we're here to advocate for them and to assist them in that notion, and we would definitely ensure that they get their rights protected.
I just wanted to go back just a little bit. C189 and C190 followed right after. And there's a reason why that happened. At that point in time, although there was a convention for the domestic workers, there was a high rate of violence in the workplace. Would it have made sense to make another convention specific to domestic workers? No, make a general one. One of the things I experienced in South Africa was at the convention that we were having, I learned that 90% of the domestic workers in the Philippines are males. And they are
harassed.
No, not only harassed, but they are gay.
Okay.
No, there's no protection for them. We've heard stories of broken hands, employers kicking employees off of ladders off the fourth floor because the paint job was not done properly, broke her hand, she was cleaning the windows and that sort of stuff. So C189 came right after C190 came right after C189. And there was a reason for that, because there needed to be a stronger protection for all workers. We looked at C190 and realized that at that time when the convention came, there were only 6 countries at the time that would have ratified the convention, no Caribbean islands. Took the convention and looked at it, and again, our laws aligned with it. The labor code was very basic with a lot of things, but it also gave strength to the convention. We looked at it and we said, why not? But at that time, when C-190 came on the mark, we had a lot of cases of sexual harassment and violence in the workplace. And two of the major areas, and I'm okay to say that, is in the government system and in the hotel system. You found that a lot of that happened then, so it was necessary to get it done. The process to have the conventions ratified was very easy. Thankfully in Antigua, the communication between the unions and the government and the processes is a little bit different from other countries, because I will tell you, Trinidad and Guyana have not ratified C-189 as yet. And you're looking at those countries being bigger than us, having more employees, they're more structured than us. And Antigua being a small island, we became the first Caribbean island to ratify C-190. And the government at that time saw the need to have it done because, as I said, a lot of the cases and the reports were coming out of the government system and out of the hotel system. So the necessity to have it and implement it was very relevant at the time because there was no control in the workplace.
Let's ask as well about the definition, the terminology used. Mr. Samuel, you gave us an example of harassment, but certainly some people see it very differently. I had an employee once who, when I asked about the deadline, said that I was harassing her. And the terms are used very loosely. So is there, what's the consensus on the terminology used within the convention, and are they widely accepted as correct in terms of what is harassment, what is workplace violence, what is sexual harassment, etc.?
Okay, so there is a definition within the convention. So it would define violence and harassment as behavior which may cause embarrassment, undue embarrassment, making a person feel uncomfortable. It would define harassment to include physical violence, so including unwanted touching, punching, and it would include harassment that occurs over, electronic media, as well. It accounts for that as well.
Excellent. And from the union's perspective, we've seen when the conventions came that we had this large incidence of reports. Is that still the case? Are we still seeing today that a lot of reports are being made about workplace violence, harassment, whether within government, whether within the hospitality sector, generally in the workforce in Antigua?
I can tell you that I know of 4 active cases right now. Yeah, so
okay,
that's just 4 that I know about.
Okay.
And we also have to look at the reporting mechanism. Are these cases being reported? I know of 4 that has been reported, not specifically being dealt by my union. One is, but you don't see that influx. You hear about it. If it's one thing, if you want to hear work, susu, as they would say.
Emele, yes.
Emele is to be in the midst of workers, but it doesn't get to where it needs to go because of that fear. So again, another convention would have been created, ratified, but there's still that fear. So as I said before, every convention that we ratify, there's a fear of reporting. There's a fear of persons wanting to say, this is happening to me because I may lose my job, or what would the public say, I'll be ridiculed, or persons who know that me and this person are in something and then all of a sudden it blows up and I no longer want to do it. So why now? So there's a whole bunch of things that comes up when you make that report. And another thing is that no witnesses. So that part of it tends to be the technical part, because you can very well say that I have been harassed. I was sexually harassed on the job. I was shoved in the bathroom or whatever, but did anybody see? So we have to be very particular with reporting, and then there's a whole investigation that goes on. Do you remove the parties from the workspace? Do you do witness? If there's no witnesses, how do you treat with both of the reports that are being made? Because the employer, it could be an employer, it could be another worker, says, well, I didn't do anything. How does the victim prove that this is happening? So the convention makes provision for that. It also, with the bill that is being debated now, well, not debated, but being discussed now as well too, there's a lot of things that come up, if and or but. If this happens, then what happens after? So there's provisions for a lot of things in the bill that is being discussed at this time.
So the evidence gathering is the responsibility of the complainant, so to speak.
Or the person who is doing the investigation.
Okay.
So you have to be prepared to go through the process. And that's one of the things we would have discussed as well, is that how long am I supposed to endure this investigation? Is it going to be a year, 6 months, 3 months? Because you also have to think about the person who's going through the trauma. You also have to think about the implications that the whole situation would have on that person. You take me away from my job for 6 months. Are you going to pay me for that 6 months while the investigation is going? So there are a lot of little things that have to come into play in order for us to reach to an amicable understanding as to what happened, and then what happens. Do we terminate? Do we move on? Do we say nothing happened and this person? So there are a lot of things that you have to think about from the law's perspective, and the unions who play the part of pressing the process through. We have to understand what our do's and don'ts are, how far we can go with something, because the law protects every aspect of the investigation.
Let's talk about that complaints process, so because you talked about how difficult it may be, particularly if the person I am to report this to is a person who I'm accusing of being violent or harassing me in the workplace. Mr. Samuel, you made mention of it earlier. How do we actually go about making complaints? What's the due process that must happen?
Okay, so the complainant would file a complaint with the employer or a person who the employer would have designated to receive complaints. Then there's a specific period of time in which the employer or the recipient has to respond to acknowledge receipt of the complaint. And then the employer may ask for further information, things that may not have been revealed at first. Then the investigation would ensue. And as Andy would have mentioned, we're not clear on what the specific time period is yet. We're still having the consultations to decide that. But the goal is obviously to ensure that there is minimal inconvenience or damage to persons' mental health, and that would include not only just the victim but also the accused person, because they're still innocent until they've been proven to be guilty.
I heard mention of industrial court, etc. What are the steps or levels before we get there in such cases where there are complaints, etc.?
So the investigation starts internally first. So there's a process internally. And I think even outside of that, if there's any need where the outcome may not be satisfying to whichever party, then we can take it through the process. Really and truly, the investigation is supposed to cover all bases to ensure that the decision that is made would have been the right decision. As Daquan would have said, you have to consider the fact that the impact it would have on both parties. I did speak about time away from work. How do we treat with that? Do we suspend? And then there's a time cap on suspension as well too. Can we get the investigation done within that suspension period? Do we remove both parties? So there's a whole lot of things that need to take place before. We have not, and I say we because I'm a part of the task force as well too, we have not decided on a time frame for all of these things. I know we did start discussions on it. We have to come back because now it's going to be read for the first time. Tomorrow, actually, it's going to be read for the first time. So we're seeing some progress on it. We have all the stakeholders. So we had employers, we had Bureau of Standard, we had everybody in the room giving their 2 cents towards the bill to say, okay, in my environment, these are the possibilities, and you have to cater for that because the law cannot be ambiguous. It has to be as general as possible in terms of the issues, but yet still very specific. So we have to be very careful how we tailor the law, because at the end of the day, you don't want a case that comes up and it doesn't fall in the ambits of the law where you now have to make amendments and that sort of stuff. So we're trying to be as precise as we
All-encompassing.
can and all-encompassing at this point in time to cover most of the ends that is happening. Especially, this exercise was actually done in 2015 or 2016 when that was a big thing as well too. And there was a need, so the police was involved, social services and that sort of stuff. And one of the things that they looked at is, let's say in the government system, let's say it's my supervisor, then I will make the report to the manager. If it's the manager, then I make it to the PS. If it's the PS, then I go up to the minister. So they did have a process in terms of how you report it and who you report it to, depending on who the person is that you're making the complaint against.
Okay, so the union, the victim or complainant, and the accused sit in a group, a meeting, we try to sort it out. If it's not satisfactory, what then happens? It goes where from there?
Well, in the new bill, you have the option of taking it to the Labour Commissioner.
Okay. Oh, that's where Mr. Samuel comes
That's
in.
where his department comes in.
Good.
Yes.
Mr. Samuel, what happens there once it gets to your office? Once the case gets to you?
Yes, the Labour Commissioner is now in charge of hearing that matter, and then he or she will deliver, their decision. But anything further than that would be you're gone into the legal process, so the industrial court.
Is there anything in the law that protects me from wrongfully accused?
Unfortunately, no.
If my memory serves me correctly, there is in the draft bill penalties for deliberately filing a false complaint.
Yes,
so that is covered.
And it's a big money too.
It should be, because you call injury to not only the person's mental health, but their reputation,
the
etc.
reputation and that sort of stuff. And in terms of reputation, we're only looking at it there, but you have to look at families. Sometimes the person could be married and
have children.
And the spouse leaves because of what is happening falsely, saying, well, so there is a great impact when you make that sort of complaint, and that's why the bill, and we try as much as possible to say that if you know that it's true, go forward with it. If you're not telling the truth, then do not, because there's going to be a penalty. Once the investigation outcome says that, well, no, that didn't happen, or persons say, no, that didn't happen, you have witnesses that cannot, justify what you're saying, then that person that is being accused has the right now to say, well, I'm seeking damages for falsely accusing me.
That's important. So I'm happy that's captured in the bill. We only have 3 minutes left, believe it or not. Ms. Yearwood, let me give you a chance to say any final words, any advice to other domestic workers or workers in general. Mr. Samuel, the same for you, and then Ms. Stevens, I'll come to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Charles. So what would I say to the nation of Antigua? Tomorrow is International Domestic Workers Day, and it is important that we consider those category of workers, and we need to remember that they are workers within the workforce, and we should not look at them differently. We hope that they will get the support, not just from domestic workers, but from society as a whole, to acknowledge the fact that they are entitled to social protection, they are entitled to their rights, and to be treated fairly in the workplace. I will let Mr. Samuel speak to the laws, but we are putting things in place that should make that easier for them to do and to achieve our goals of getting them the protection that they need and to be treated fairly in Antigua and Barbuda.
Mr. Samuel?
All right, so I'd like to say thank you for having me. I think that both of these conventions, they go hand in hand in helping to make our workforce safer, more equitable, and less discriminatory overall, and I think everybody should want that. So they're definitely a positive.
And I'm going to close and say that I think now is the time for workers to rise up. There are a lot of things that's happening within the workplace that is not right, and a lot of persons are fearful, but the union is here. There are laws that are now being put in place to protect you, and I think now is the time to speak up. I think now is the time that workers understand that they have the power, they have their rights, and those rights should not be trampled on because of a paycheck. And I think that is where the fear is. So we need to break that fear. So I'm speaking to all workers, domestic workers and general workers. Once something does not feel right, probably isn't right.
And that's a good way to end tonight's program. We've heard from several experts in the trade unionism and the labor relations fields on the day before International Domestic Workers' Day is commemorated. And so we've had a very interesting conversation on Conventions 189 and 190 dealing with domestic workers and with violence and harassment in the workplace. We thank you so much for having joined us. I want to say thank you to our in-house panelists, Ethan Yearwood, Dequan Samuel, and Stephen for all joining us this evening. And we thank you, our audiences, whether on here or online, for having been with us. This is another very special ABS TV Presents. I'm Ursula Charles Jr. Thank you so much for being with us. Enjoy what's left of your evening. Good night.